The best thing that you can do for the world is kill yourself right now. While this might sound a little extreme, it is absolutely true from a thermodynamic perspective. You might not know this, but the only way that you were brought up was by disordering the surroundings around you. Why, do you say? The answer is entropy, and it is the driving force behind life itself, and it is what chooses the outcome of daily events that we take for granted. Knowing about entropy can help you appreciate the miracle behind life itself and the possibilities that we value. It can even help you gain competitive advantages in the activities that you love. We will proceed by first exploring what entropy is, next, its effects, and finally, how it is overcome. But first, what is entropy? Most quintessentially, entropy is nature's tendency for maximum disorder. Actually, it is the measure of disorder. It is fundamentally based on possibility. Disorder can be described as increased in many different kinds of ways. It can be mixed. It can be the mixing of two things. It can be the speed of random motions or spatial occupancy. It can be the random directional orientation of things. It can be taking something out of order, and it could even be achieved by decreasing chemical energy. By looking at everyday events, we'll see that we're already aware that entropy exists, that nature does favor disorder. For example, your room naturally becomes a mess not because you want it to be that way, but because there are just simply more ways for it to be a mess than there are ways for it to be clean. You'll oftentimes miss a three-pointer in basketball not because you want to miss, but simply because there are more ways to miss than there are ways to make it. You'll fail an exam without studying not because you want to fail, but because there are more ways to fail than there are ways to pass. Now, you'd be very surprised if you were to throw an ordered deck of cards on the ground and pick them up to find them still in order. Likewise, you'll see that salt dissolves not because it's supposed to, but simply because there are more ways for it to be mixed than there are ways for it to be separated in water. A box of balls separated by color with a divider in the middle becomes completely mixed when we remove the divider and shake it. You'll also see that there is no amount of shaking that will separate the balls again. As we can already see, nature favors disorder or disorganization because disorganized events are more probable. To overcome disorder, we have to do something. We have to put things where they belong. We have to accomplish the improbable. We have to organize at some level. Either way, this takes energy and will only happen when the energy it takes to organize overcomes the natural tendency to disorganize. However, that disorder doesn't just disappear in the chemical world. It goes elsewhere. Now, when I say that entropy wins, I mean that something is becoming disordered because it is nature's tendency to do so. However, disorder can only increase for one part of the world, the system or the surroundings. The system is the part of the world that we focus our attention on. It could be you, the contents of a container, or even a cup of coffee, for example. The surroundings are everything.
Now, when I say that entropy wins, I mean that something becomes more disordered, because it is nature's tendency to do so. However, disorder can only increase for one part of the world, the system or the surroundings. The system is a part of the world that we focus our attention on. It could be you, or the contents of a container, for example, or even a cup of coffee. The surroundings are everything else around the system. Now, based on what we already know, if I were to take a pile of hydrogen atoms, carbon atoms, heavy metals, and oxygen and throw it in a pile somewhere, I would have a mixed pile of carbon, hydrogen, metals, and oxygen. I wouldn't have a person like you, for example, because there are millions of ways this pile can be mixed, but only one way that it can actually form a person like yourself. The only way that you overcame entropy was by taking the disorder in that pile of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen and metals, and you put it elsewhere. Entropy is conserved. It can be moved, but it can never be destroyed. But how did it move? Forming you was done by overcoming the tendency for disorder for the system, you, and releasing it into the surroundings. You put that disorder into the surroundings by releasing heat, or energy in the form of heat. Heat causes disorder by causing things in the atmosphere to move faster, occupying more positions per unit of time than they did before. Now, in the chemical world, things are always moving. The only thing that varies the speed of movement is heat or energy. Now, adding heat to something causes those atoms, or whatever, to move faster. Now, heating water causes the molecules to circulate and bounce around faster and faster until they no longer stick together and finally literally fly right out of the pot into what we call steam. Now, since the molecules in this form are moving much, much faster, they are farther apart and they occupy a lot more space and thus more possible positions. It becomes more disordered or random in the gas phase, also known as steam. But if the steam were cooled and the molecules slowed down to the point where they stick together again, forming the liquid that we know of as water, cooling down even farther, the molecules stop moving and stick in an organized, lined up pattern known as a crystal. Now, even then, the molecules vibrate a little, but are still very organized and in a very organized state, pointed in one direction, kind of like cars on an interstate in rush hour traffic. But notice how the ice formed only by way of taking enough heat away from the water. At cold temperatures, when interacting with a system, entropy wins for the surroundings because heat also favors mixing. Heat always tries to escape to the coldest area. As Zoomdahl put it, it is like giving $5 to a bum versus $5 to a millionaire. The $5 is much more readily accepted by the bum, as is the heat accepted by the colder region. The surroundings will only allow the system to unfavorably decrease its entropy because it is lacking energy in the form of heat that bad. Really, it takes a lot of energy to order a system to this degree, but since heat is the only means of compensation in this matter because it is so mixable, a lot of heat must come out to make this happen. Now, that's why the temperature must be below 32 degrees for water to freeze. The surroundings must be lacking that amount of energy to suck all of the energy that keeps the water molecules moving. We explain changes in entropy in terms of changes in heat because it is more measurable this way, but really, entropy is the real driving force behind the reaction. This is what happens when you put a glass of water in the freezer. In the liquid phase, the molecules are still bouncing around pretty fast, so they are very disordered. But if we move this disorder outside of the glass by letting its heat go to the point where the molecules stop moving, we get an ordered crystal, at the expense of releasing all of its heat energy in the form of heat to the surroundings. Here, we achieve disorder in the system by causing disorder to the surroundings. Now, notice how the ice crystals forming is not very probable, but it happened anyway. This is exactly what it took to form you. No matter what happens, creating order somewhere causes disorder elsewhere. The release of energy is what causes the disorder. Now, one interesting thing about releasing energy to achieve order somewhere is that the resulting energy is in a less usable form. For example, when you burn gas, when your car burns gas, chemical energy is converted to heat and lower energy molecules like CO2. Now, heat is impossible to store, and CO2 is so stable that it isn't reactive and we can't use it either. This is why gas can only be burned once. The natural processes that make gas occur over thousands of years. In essence, we are formed by converting chemical energy into a less usable form, heat and stable molecules. In order to reverse this process, it takes thousands of years, and even after you die. So don't go kill yourself, but do appreciate the fact that your existence is very improbable. What's more, the odds against you forming are far greater than those against you making that three-pointer or acing that exam, whereas nature overcomes its own tendency for disorder through the exchange of heat. You overcome the tendency for disorder through the exchange of practice and hard work. In a way, entropy can be good and it can be bad. It's good in the way that so many possibilities exist, and it's bad in the way that we value the most improbable events. Either way, knowing this will help you see the possibilities that are there and that the sky really is the limit. Your only real limitation is disbelief. When you believe that these possibilities are there, you'll be more apt to shoot for them, and that is what overcoming entropy is all about.